really excited to have our college essay expert here, Kate, who is going to be leading our presentation. So I get to kind of sit back and join in with you and listen. So we're really, really excited to have Kate take the lead here, and I will let you take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad we get to start on time because one of my most important things is I want to make sure we respect everyone's time. Can everyone see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So hopefully your students are close to you or near you and that they can grab some scratch paper along in this process, because over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to have them actually participate in a couple of brainstorming activities that I think are really important. And it's at least a launching point. I also think listening to somebody for that long is really obnoxious, and you should have something to do, right? You should have a takeaway from what we're doing today. But welcome and thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, if you could type them in the chat, or feel free to unmute and just let us know what you're thinking, or if something doesn't make sense, I would love the opportunity to talk to you. So just let us know if anything is confusing or if you need clarification. We have somebody new. All right, so to give you a little bit of background on myself, my name is Kate Forman. I'm an English teacher at River City High School. I've been teaching English for 11 years. I have also taught every grade level. So I've seen the baby writers in 9th grade who then are now my seniors and developed into strong writers and thoughtful writers. So it really does happen. They do gain skills over that course of time. I've taught both honors and college prep. So I've seen a range of writing styles, perspectives, and levels, development levels. So I come to you having sort of a wealth and of knowledge and experience, helping young writers become the writers they want to be, which is really fun and exciting. I'm also an independent contractor for Rutgers Edge. I've been with Karen since 2017, I believe. Honestly, I kind of guessed at that year, but I was like, that sounds about right. I work with students one-on-one, and we go through the entire college application process. We also very specifically talk about their writing, and I specialize a lot on the essay process. It's part of the application process that I really love and most people hate. In addition to that, I have 2 daughters of my own who are in high school. My youngest is in 10th grade, and we are already having that conversation about where she's headed and what she wants to do. And my 12th grader right now is in the application process. We are writing her essay. We are editing her stuff. We even started with one draft and then hated it, and then we scrapped it, and we've completely moved on to a different topic. So don't be afraid to change your mind. Don't be afraid to write something and throw it away. Don't be afraid to write anything at all, because you never know what's going to become like the idea, the moment where you just strike gold, which that's the exciting part of this whole process. So I wanted to start with the questions I am asked almost immediately upon meeting any new students. They always hit me with these pieces. The first one is, I know that I need to make my presentation or my essay personal, but that makes me feel really uncomfortable, which is fair, right? We're asking students who are 17, 18 to find something about themselves that is personal and is deep and is vulnerable. And in that, we're asking them to expose who they are to somebody that they don't know. So I try to remind them that it's exactly somebody you don't know, and somebody you will never meet, and somebody that will never cross paths with you and know you and remember that it was your essay. And so don't be afraid to take the step into the unknown and write something that scares you, because you'll never know that person. They will never call you up and judge you for it. So, and what you want is to put your best foot forward, and you want to sell who you are. And sometimes we have to break down those barriers, and sometimes we have to be uncomfortable in order to get what we want. So don't be afraid of being uncomfortable. The second one happens often. I get this question a lot, and it's, what if nothing bad has ever happened to me? And for some reason, and I don't know why, but when students go to write an essay about themselves, they feel like they should be exposing some awful truth about themselves, or some some terrible background that has happened to them. And that is not necessarily true. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes those things have happened, and we can explore those as ideas. However, we don't need to write about bad things that happen to us in order to make ourselves interesting. What makes us captivating is only what separates us and makes us unique versus someone else. That's all we're trying to accomplish. Um, Number three, what if my topic is boring? I I have never met a boring student in my entire life. I have never met a teenager of any kind that is quote unquote boring. But again, there's this idea that if we don't have something wild and exciting to share, then it must not be worth sharing. But that's not true. Our most calm stories can be our most impactful, or the things that we often accept as normal could separate us from somebody else and could be a very interesting topic. So boring is really all relative, right? And by the way, boring doesn't really exist. Your story is unique because it's yours. And all we have to do is get to that, and you will find the exact thing that will make you stand out and stand apart, which is going to be great. Lots of people think they don't have anything to write about, and I get that question every day. What if I don't have anything to write about? And then the next thing I know, sorry, let me just admit somebody. The next thing I know, we're talking and we're brainstorming, and all of a sudden they have a lot to talk about, which means they have a lot to write about. So don't fight those conversations. Have them and have them often. Writing is unnatural. It's not an easy, simple process. So the more you talk, the more you'll figure out you have a lot to write about. And the last thing that I often hear is, I think I should pick a question that no one else ever picks, as if the uniqueness of the question will determine your story or your uniqueness. And that's just not true. And when we look at the questions in a little bit, you'll see the questions are actually really vague, and the questions themselves are really boring. So it's all about what you do with them, and then that will determine your likability and how we market you and what you have to say about it. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I would be happy to answer them. Okay, so the writing process overall, here's what happens, right? It is really intimidating. There are requirements, there are specific prompts, there are word limits, right? Automatically when kids see word limits, it's all of a sudden like, what story am I going to tell in 650 words? How do I fit my life into that? And what I want you to do is break away from the requirements and just remember that at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is find your story, and then we're going to tell it. And then you can find the resources and you can find the ways to make that story worth telling. We also think differently than we write. I think so many times, I've said this to my students, right? They'll tell me an idea, and then I look at them and I go, write that. And then they go to write it and they go, I don't know how to get that idea to paper. And that's fair, because we actually think in terms of cause and effect, and a lot of times we write in terms of effect and then cause. So we do a lot of things opposite on paper that we do in our brains. So the writing process is not simple. So I suggest you get help or resources, or ask those that you know, or reach out to us. We can help you in the long term with that. In addition, writing is not linear. Writing is not sort of a 1, 2, 3. I'm going to give you suggestions. I'm going to give you the way that I sort of work, but I also make adjustments on the fly depending on who I'm working with and what their needs are. So be flexible, be willing to start over, be willing to be wrong, and know that every student is different. You're going to write differently than everyone else. The voice on the paper should sound different because it should sound like you. And the writing process, ultimately at the end, you should write it and you should feel like, wow, that says everything I need to say about me. And I know that when someone reads that, they're getting a full picture, and that it represents me and how I feel and who I am. And then you're going to get an honest response. and then it's going to be a great college experience. So where to start? This is where I'm going to ask you to have that scratch paper in front of you. Um, you'll take a few notes and you'll write a few things down. So just have that accessible. So I always want to talk about the process and the purpose of brainstorming. You're never going to walk out, not never, but you rarely walk out of brainstorming and go, that's it, that's the whole thing. We've got it all figured out from start to finish, and it's going to be perfect and it's going to be great. The whole reason that I ask you to brainstorm is because I need you to purposely and intentionally think about yourself in a way that you don't normally do in your everyday. Nobody walks around their kitchen making dinner or making a snack and thinking about themselves and like their perfect story or their perfect experience, right? So you have to very intentionally think about who you are, the experiences you've had, the people that are important, the ways in which you've changed, the problems you have overcome, the things that impassion you. You have to intentionally think about those things. Otherwise, you're going to miss the story. Okay. So when I have you go through these, I want you to genuinely think about who you are in your life and what's important to you. I'm going to ask you to think about your life experiences. Brainstorming also gives you just a starting place. I think one of the hardest things to do in writing is begin, right? Those first 4 sentences, that introduction is always the hardest piece. It's always the most difficult place to go because you're always asking yourself, how do I begin a story that really is vulnerable? And where do I begin with that story? What words do I choose? So if we think about those things enough, we can find our starting points. And your results are going to vary. Like brainstorming is not a perfect system. And some of you might walk out of this and go, wow, that brainstorming gave me like 4 ideas. And now I really have something to work from. And then some of you might be like, I only got 1. And that either way, you have a starting point. And sometimes where you start, right, is not where you finish. And all of that is okay. I want to encourage you to embrace the ups and downs and the ins and outs of the process and just let it happen. And don't say like, oh, well, I really wanted to write this essay, but if it's not working, then shift to the next. Okay, so there's 3 things we're going to ask you to run through. The first one is an object brainstorm. The second one is a values exercise. And the last and probably most obvious is we're going to look at the actual Common App questions. So, all right, so I'm assuming you have your pen and your paper handy and in front of you. I want you to think of 3 objects, items, things, personal items, not, I don't know, not a car necessarily, right? Not just things you like, but think of things, the 3 most important things in your room or in your home or in your life. Maybe it's a ring you wear. Maybe it's a special pen that your grandfather gave you. Maybe it's a pair of shoes you own. I don't know. Oops, didn't mean to click that. Right, so think of 3 items, objects that are incredibly meaningful to you. Somebody gave you something special. Somebody, gave you something for Christmas one year and you still have it in your room and you're going to save it forever. I have, and this isn't on my list, I actually have a stuffed monkey and his name is Charlie. And my brother gave him to me when I was 8 years old. And I'm much older right now than 8 years old. And I still have that thing. And it sits in my closet. And when I'm sad, I go get it. Because it's meaningful because my older brother, who I always thought hated me, gave it to me. Right? And so it becomes meaningful. So I'm going to ask you to take 2 minutes. It's 4:16 right now on my clock. I will come back to you at 4:18 and we'll go over your items. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you have your three objects. If it were me, I would write down that I have rugby cleats that are one of my most prized possessions. I have Oakley sunglasses, not just one pair. And I have this scary house painting. So my rugby cleats, as pictured, are 3 years old. They smell terrible. No one wants to go near them. Um, but I won a national championship in those boots, and I will probably never throw them away. They will stay with me for the rest of my life. And when I still wear them, I wore them last week at conditioning. Um, they no longer really work. The cleats are completely worn down, and I need to buy a new pair. But until I can find a pair that make me feel as happy as those, I will keep them forever. My next object is a pair of Oakleys, and it's not just that particular pair. Honestly, that was the pair that was closest to me. But I have like 12 pairs of Oakleys. I have an Oakley obsession. I don't buy clothes, but I buy sunglasses. It's very unique to me, and I love them. And the last is this painting that is literally in the center of my home. It's actually behind me. You can't see it because the whiteboard's there, but it's directly behind me on that big wall. And it's probably the first piece of artwork that I have ever like bought. And I walked into to the gallery and I saw it and I loved it. And my husband showed up one day and he bought it for me and I just cried. It just had that sort of emotional response to me, right? So now that you have objects, whatever they might be, okay, I want you to take another, let's say, minute and a half this time. And what's the story behind them? What is it that you connect to each of those objects that is meaningful? What if I told you you had to write a story about your rugby cleats? What would your story be? Right? So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. Spend a minute and a half or so and try to come up with the story behind the object. I'm going to let you work on that for a moment. Take another 30 seconds. All right, so if I were to give you my story, okay, if I were to write a story about my rugby cleats, I would write the story about how I really found my footing in rugby. I joined rugby at 18 in college, and it gave me a sense of identity that I had never had before. It gave me a club and a family. It really centered me at a time in my life that was not centered. Was that time in my life was actually pretty scary and it was overwhelming and I was a little bit lost. And then I found this grounding in this sport and in the family that came from this sport. And so I could talk about my cleats and how those two items are now connected. Now we're going to talk about my sunglasses. It's My signature, like I said before, and I like having a signature. I like that people notice that I buy my Oakleys and that I only buy Oakleys. I'm an Oakley snob. Um, I like standing out in that way, and I will buy the most ridiculous versions of Oakleys that anyone has ever seen. I just bought a pair that are really, really round, and they kind of make you look like a fly, and I'm okay with it because I'm okay with being really different and maybe a little bit obnoxious. So that's maybe the part of me that wants to stand out in some ways, and so I could talk about how Oakleys are a metaphor for that part of my identity. I could also talk about the scary house painting. I don't even know what else to call it because it doesn't actually have a name. And again, it reflects the idea that I like things that are different. I've had many people walk into my home and question my sensibilities, and talk about how my artwork is so different in my home, and it's not flowers, and it's not peaceful. It's dramatic. Um, it's loud. It's very distinctive, and I enjoy those parts of those things. So it's always good to look at your objects and ask yourself what it represents about you and what it says about you. Okay, so keep that scratch paper, and let's try another one. This one's just as important. It's going to be the values brainstorm. So this time, instead of writing down three objects, you will write three values that are the most important to you. Um, Three values that for you are more important than anything else. Let me, hold on. I want to get you a link, but it's not letting me. There we go. Hold on. I wanted to get you a link. That's not letting me do that. Karen, can you link it publicly? The values one?
I put it in the chat to everybody. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should have sent to everyone.
So hopefully you got the link, because on the link, it will give you a list of values to choose from in case you don't have like a quick reference for yourself as well. Can you see it on the screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Great. So also, this is where the exercises are coming from. We got from the college essay guide. So when you link up, this is where you're going to go. And it's the values exercise. And he gives you a full list of values. So if you could take 2 minutes, run through the list, try to find your top three values. And you can always go back and edit your list or add more to them in order to get a more full exercise together. But for the sake of our purposes, if you could write down three of your top values on your brainstorm sheet, that would be great. And I'll give you about a minute and a half to do so.
And Kate, I'm just going to pop in and just say for the students out there, don't overthink this, and definitely don't think about, I got to pick a value that sounds good for other people. It really should come pretty quickly to you. The things that in your gut, those are the things you value the most.
Maybe another like 10, 12 seconds to get your list together. Okay. So when I look at that list, the first three that grabbed my attention, right? The first three, like it took me about 30 seconds to run through it. Personal development, authenticity, and humor. Those were the three that I went, bam, that they speak to me. And they weren't the only ones on the list, but they were the ones that really sort of struck a chord. So then again, I want you to ask yourself, what are the stories behind those values? Why do I value them? Why are they so important to me? Um, and is there something bigger than just the value? So take, I don't know, a minute or so and write down next to each of those um, any story or reason why those are so important to you. So if I were to tell you about personal development, I would say that I'm constantly changing. I change my hair color. I change my sunglasses. I change where I live. I've moved across the country. I've I've changed careers. Like I am always looking for the next. So for me, personal development is a pattern in my life. It's not just something I talk about, it's something that I actively pursue, and I always am looking to be like the best version of myself. So I'm always asking myself, what's next? Where do I go from here? How do I build into the next thing? It's a question I ask myself at least weekly, if not daily. If I think of authenticity, I like honesty. I don't do fake. I don't want to be around people who are fake. I cut people out of my life who I think are fake. Um, and I just like being around people who are genuine and who can just be themselves, right? And lastly, humor. I use humor even when it's inappropriate. I use humor even when I'm sad. Um, and my whole family's like that, right? So it also connects me to the people that I love and adore the most. When when I went home to Chicago a few weeks ago, my cousin had he was just having the worst time, and all we did was laugh about it, and not because we're mean, but because that's how we sort of deal with life's, I don't know, ups and downs, and it's how it's always been, even when I was a kid. And so the last thing I want to ask you to do is to look at the actual prompts from the Common App. So the first one is about background, identity, or an interest that you have, to tell us how it's impacted you or it's developed in your life, and what it means to you. Second question is any obstacles you may have faced in your life, how you've overcome them, what you've learned from them, how they're important to you. Third one is, have you ever questioned a belief or an idea in your life? And what's the result, and how has that affected you, and how have you changed? The fourth question is about a problem you solved or something that you want to solve. Is there something out in the world you're like, that's an issue and I think I could make it better, and I want to pursue that. Number five is asking you about your accomplishments and what you've done over the course of your life. Number six is about your passions. And number seven is kind of a free for all. It's like, hey, choose what you want. If the prompts above don't fit, you can tell us something that you think is incredibly meaningful to you. So what I want you to do now is I want you to think of the objects you chose, and I want you to think of the values that you hold. And I want you to, like I did, try to match them up with a prompt. So for me, background, identity, or interest would relate to rugby, and it would relate to the idea of authenticity. Um, because my identity is so wrapped up in being authentic and being an individual and being my own person, I could talk about those avenues in my life. Um, my objects and my values didn't necessarily directly talk about an obstacle I had faced. I just kind of left that one blank and moved on and didn't try to force it. Same with 3 and 4. Like when I read those questions, I was like, oh, I don't really see the immediate connection between maybe rugby and a problem, or personal development and a belief or idea. So I moved to the ones that the answer sort of came very easily and naturally, which were then 5 and 6 with accomplishments and passion, where I could connect rugby, personal development, and in passions, I could even connect authenticity. Um, Obviously, any topic can connect to all. And then what you also might be looking at now is other ideas might be coming to mind. So write them down. You might be looking at question 2 with obstacles you faced and have lots of ideas. Feel free to write them out right now. Don't stop the process just because it's kind of piecemeal right now. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to try to write notes next to each of those. You can just number on your paper 1 through 7. You don't have to write all the stuff down. Um, You'll also be getting a copy of this later, so like you'll have that to reference and go through as well. So I'll give you a minute to write as many ideas down as you possibly can. Okay, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to write some ideas down, and hopefully you're starting to think maybe a little bit outside the box, which is the hope, right? And making connections between things that maybe weren't so obvious earlier. And if you notice the questions, right? So one, they're really vague, and they're vague on purpose. They can't, if you think about it, like colleges can't ask like incredibly specific things. They need to leave it open for you, and your interpretation of the question is just as valid as the question itself. So feel free to choose any of the questions that you want to answer. And you can choose any option. It doesn't matter what question you pick. A lot of that, I think I addressed this later on as well, but there's no greater value in question 1 versus question 7. There's no question that they're hoping you answer. They could not care less. In fact, what is going to make your essay stand out is whether or not we can get to the most authentic, specific version of your story. And that's the goal at the end of this, is to get you to not just tell your story, but to tell what you've gained from it, or who you've become through that experience, or how you've changed or evolved. Like those are the most important things to focus on as you move through that writing process. Look for patterns among your objects, among your values, among your life stories, and ask yourself, can you tie them together? Can you bring those ideas together and maybe create your own response? And then that will help you find the story that you really want to tell. So bringing it all together, this is where it gets really, really fun. So I just want to remind you that the only responsibility you have in this writing process is to showcase yourself. That's it. You don't have to tell any specific story. You only want to make sure that by the end of it, that you walk away knowing that you gave them the best story about you that showcases you in the best way that you choose to be showcased. Doesn't matter what question or prompt. And you want to personalize each essay, but that doesn't mean you can't start with the ordinary. Doesn't mean you can't start with that sort of what we call the one story as English writers. Um, the ordinary can lead to greatness. The ordinary can become your special story. And here's how it might look. These are real students that I've worked with, and um, and they're actually all students I work with currently. So student number one, we started with, right, the one story, the divorce story. And unfortunately, lots of us have that story, but it doesn't make your story any less unique, right? A lot of times, whatever version of that story you have is meaningful and it has affected you in a very specific way. So make sure you focus on how it changed you and how that moment in your life maybe put you on a different trajectory or shifted your thinking, um, or affected you emotionally, or maybe it made you better. In this case, this student started with the divorce, right, which is prompt two, the problems and the things he had to overcome. But ultimately, what that story really became about was he found his pathway, his career pathway, because his parents got divorced. He ended up in therapy, and then he figured out that he wanted to do that same thing, that he found his calling because this terrible thing happened to him. So the story started with divorce, but it ended somewhere completely different. And so we ultimately ended up with prompt six, right, which is all about his passion, because he's so passionate about where he's headed in his life. And he was so excited about having found something that spoke to him in such a specific way that we even decided on a different prompt. So that was really great. Student number two, one of her big accomplishments was that she was captain of her speech team and she had won all these awards, and she was a phenomenal writer, right? And all those things were really meaningful. And ultimately, where it led us was her discovering her voice and her leadership style. That she always thought of herself as being really shy and introverted, and again, one of those people that never had anything wrong in their life, or until you started talking to her and you realize, like, oh, all these things have happened and you've used speech team in order to deal with them. And so that's where that essay went. And again, we started with prompt four and we ended up with number one, which is about her identity and her background. Student three, the big event that happened in her life was that she moved here from Japan, and she's an immigrant, and that is a very specific part of her life. And ultimately, we were able to really discover that yes, she's an immigrant, but what really defines who she is that she has been able to bridge this multicultural life. She's been able to embrace both her Japanese culture and the American culture, and she's made good friends, and she's always been able to deal with that diversity and that duality in her life in a really positive way. And then student four, he started with computer science, which, he was so afraid to talk about because he was like, it sounds really boring. And it's just computer science, right? Except when we got through the first draft, what we really found was it wasn't computer science. It was what he likes to call his quote unquote math brain. He sees the world like a puzzle, and that's his talent, and that is his skill, and it's also what he's passionate about. And it's connected him and his dad, and it's built this background in him, and we've been able to really explore that idea. So you can start with the ordinary. You can start with what you think is like your no big deal story. And what you're going to find is that the reason you want to write about it is because there's an underbelly to it. The vulnerability is there. The real story is there. You have to let the story happen. So when you write about the divorce, or when you write about your accomplishments, really start to let the story take you where it's going to go, right? Like, don't fight the narrative. just let it happen. And in that narrative, you're going to find the very thing you want to write about. So to go into a little bit more depth about two of these students. So they did the values and the objects brainstorming. And this is the one about the speech class, right? And her ability to, she won awards and speeches and all the things, right? So we found patterns in her writing. Everything she wrote about had to do with empathy and kindness. She loved to write. She also was very shy, right? So like all these things ended up turning into her writing about a strength that she didn't necessarily acknowledge that she had. And we were able to find that story because we started looking for patterns in her brainstorming. So it was very evident that empathy was a common thread. Listening was a common thread, but so was writing. And so through that writing, she found that voice. Our second example, her values were family and bravery and culture. And she's very kind and sweet, right? And then her objects were a rugby ball and other rugby players and an autograph she had and all these other things that were related to the sport she loved. And then we also talked about the family connection. And we landed on talking about how she's always had to deal with being the only girl on a boys rugby team. And she's always been she's always had to battle like this divide of where she fits in, being in two different cultures. And we just finished this piece and we ended with her duality and her being able to embrace that multicultural background. So it's all about looking for patterns. It's all about looking for those common threads in your life that might not at first glance seem obvious, but they're all there. And then you just have to be willing to write about them and be really honest. So if I were to work with you, this is the basic structure of how I would approach the writing process. And again, I'm just going to repeat, this is not a one size fits all, and it can be adjusted to fit any particular need. But typically there's a first draft. And anytime there's a first draft, I encourage you to write everything and anything. One of the clients I'm working with currently, her first draft was 6 pages. A typical Common App essay is like a page and a half. This one was 6 pages. But out of that 6 pages, we were able to find the exact story we wanted to tell. So don't be afraid to just keep writing. I always tell students, just vomit on the page all the stuff you can think of. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't even matter if it necessarily fits what you think you're writing or if it all makes sense. Encourage yourself to sit down and just write without any worry of grammar, without any worry of word choice, without any worry of how long it is or how short it is, and without any worry about it being good. It's not about being good on your first draft. It's just about putting words to the page so you have a place to begin. On your second rough draft, the best thing to do is to go through it and really ask yourself, what can I move, right? Like look at it just from a structure standpoint. Like, is your introduction working? Do you like it? Or do you think that would be better placed at the end? There have been times where I've moved someone's conclusion and moved it up into their introduction because it needs some adjusting. And wherever they ended was so good that that's where we should begin because we want to get someone's attention. So look for structure, look for how the pieces of your essay can start to come together to create the flow and organization that's going to convey the story in the best possible way. And ask yourself, what's missing? How do I, and where do I add the information that seems to be lacking? And what can I delete? Don't be afraid to delete it. Just because you wrote it doesn't mean you have to keep it. I think a lot of times as writers, we feel like, oh, well, I spent time writing it, so I can't get rid of it. And that's the exact opposite. What you want to do is question yourself and ask yourself, does that fit my purpose? Is what I just wrote the exact thing I want them to read? Or can I make it better? Or does it have a place? Or should I just delete it? Okay. The third draft will be about refining. Refining can be It's multi-layered, right? It can be changing words and phrases. It can be editing for some grammar. It can be reorganizing again. Maybe you wrote and then you're finding, oh, that structure doesn't quite work right. Or maybe I'm missing something else. Or maybe I need to delete something else. So be really critical of your own writing. Don't get attached to it. Don't don't care about it so that you keep it just to keep it. Make sure that you're really thoughtful about what you keep on that page, because ultimately you have 650 words and all those words will matter. Okay. And then you'll refine again. And then I would suggest having someone look at it for words and phrases. Precision is going to be key, and word choice is going to be key. You're going to want to make sure that you are saying and conveying the exact thing you want to convey, because you only have this one shot. You only have this one chance. And then you'll finalize the word count, you'll edit for grammar, and bam, you're done. So that is how I run through every client. That is the exact process that we go through. We write to write, we write for structure and organization, and then we write to refine, and then we do all the specifics at the very end. So if you feel stuck, write what you know. If nothing else, go back to what you know and just write from your heart and write what you know and write what you feel. Don't be afraid to just start from a place of unknown and get it on the paper. I also find it helpful to talk to somebody that doesn't actually know you that well, like an English teacher or someone that you trust, or just someone that's a little bit more of an acquaintance. And I know that might sound awkward, but they're going to ask probing questions because they don't know the answers, and they will help you dig out and find the very story that could be yours. And then ask the grown-ups in your life to tell you about you, because their perspective of you is going to be very different than your perspective of you. So make sure that you get all those perspectives, because that might strike a chord in you as well. So these were the questions that were submitted. And I want to make sure I go through those and then give you time, at least for a couple minutes, for some questions. So the question was, what's more important, the topic, like how creative or unique, or the quality of writing? And my simple and not easy answer is both. But I also want to remind you that what we think is creative is subjective. And what they really want to know is about you. Like, they really want to know something special about you and what makes you you. So you can pick any question, but really make sure that your story is vulnerable, and make sure that it's honest, and make sure that it really conveys something about you. Like, if you just tell me that you won an award, that doesn't tell me anything about you. It doesn't tell me whether or not you had to fight to get there. It doesn't tell me if you had to beat somebody else to do it. Like, you've got to give me something underneath that surface to make it valuable. And then you do want to make sure your writing is good. So you want to put somebody's eyes on it. You want to make sure that somebody edits it. You want to make sure that somebody looks at it for grammar and for quality of writing. That will be very important, because if you don't sound good, right, then people will pass very quickly on you. You have a very short amount of time in that essay to make an impression. How do I know when my essay is good enough? It's a difficult question, but I would say two things. From your own perspective, you're going to know that it's quote unquote good enough when you feel like it is a reflection of who you are and it gives the impression that you want to give. So I would have a few people read it and give you feedback and let you know whether or not it conveys a specific message about yourself. And then again, you need to have a professional edit and look at it and give you specific feedback. I would not wing it, particularly now, which ties into the last question, which is how to stand out without SAT scores, right? Like, that's this weird position you're in. So the first is that you're going to have all the other stuff, right? You're going to have a GPA, a class rank, your extracurriculars, your letters of rec, and your list of activities. But the one thing that you are going to put your own stamp on is your essay. Your essay will be key. I think it's going to hold a lot of weight this year with acceptances. because the one thing they can go back to is your essay and what did you say about yourself and what did you share about yourself and how well did you write. So all those elements are going to come together, and the essay is going to be really, really important. So you're going to want to make sure that you seek out some support in that area to make sure that you are right on track. If you're looking for help, we are available. You can email us. And again, you're going to get this in an email early next week, this whole presentation. So you don't have to write those down. Or if you have your phone out, you can take a picture of our emails and you can reach out at any given time. It is 4:53 or 4:54 on my time. And I just wanted to give that last 5 minutes for anyone that had any questions. You can write them in the chat. You can unmute. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions, or ideas at this point?
Great job, Kate.
Hey, thanks, Danielle. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good.
That was awesome.
Emily?
She's doing great.
Awesome.
Doing good.
Love it. If there's no questions, I don't want to keep you beyond the time. And again, you'll have my email. So if you want to reach out and ask me anything, please feel free. If you need help with your students' essays, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you. Karen, any last words?
Yeah, no, I mean, the only thing I was gonna mention is, right before this whole thing started, I was telling Kate that you'd be surprised how many students, seniors, don't start thinking about essays and applications till honestly much too late. It is the end of September now. Deadlines, if you're doing early action or early decision, that's November 1st. It's about a month. Honestly, that's when we think about the process that Kate laid out, you need time, right? We want time to think and reflect and revise. Unfortunately, a lot of students try to cram this in like, oh, I'll put it together. And you don't want that, right? If you have a deadline that's November 1st, you should not be turning it in that day. Every year, the platforms for all of these different colleges, they all crash on the same day because everyone's trying to turn it in at 11:59, which is crazy. You want to be able to have your stuff ready to go, submit it. Also making sure that all the other pieces of your application can be turned in on time as well. So, truly, if you have applications that are, at colleges that are competitive, you want to make sure that you make yourself stand out by ensuring that this essay piece gets the care that it deserves. So, just don't wait till the end, the last week and say, oh, we should talk to someone. Reach out to us sooner rather than later, and see if there's something we can help you with. Yeah.
Great.
And with that, I would say thank you, Kate, so much for
Absolutely.
all of that information. And like Kate mentioned, I will be sending out an email to everyone who signed up ahead of time. We'll include resources and all that stuff, and we'll have this recording up as well. And for everyone else, thanks so much. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.